So my name is Jim Thompson. I'll quickly introduce myself. I started life as a scientist. I was a physicist and did physics research, was an academic for some years. So there'll be a few graphs in this presentation, I'm afraid. I then went to work in Silicon Valley for quite a few years in the high-tech industry, in the semiconductor industry, and then set up this company called Cogbooks with some colleagues out there. And our goal is to bring science-based methods to web-based learning, quite a simple goal. What I'm going to try to do today is, I quite like the fact your talk kind of digressed a bit, because mine does as well. I was a bit worried I was going to talk about education. What I'm going to do today is, I'm going to talk, first of all, a little bit more generally about the impact of science and technology, and then get into specifically what we do in adaptive learning, so you can see a little bit of the kind of technology that Donald was referring to. Right. So I want to start by looking at this from the perspective of people out in Silicon Valley and in the US at the moment. And the reason is because they are focusing their sights on education technology at the moment in a really big way. I did a back of the envelope calculation, and I think that in the last 2 or 3 years, somewhere between $400 and $500 million has been put in VC money into education technology startups in the US. They're really focusing on it, and they can believe they can do something about it. And this is one of the reasons, if you go back through the history of what used to be called information technology, which is quite a quaint term these days. Is there a pointer on here that I can point with? Oh, yeah. What were the gating items? What were the limiters in the technology as we moved through time? And it started off with the hardware. We needed really fast computing power, and that was that's not working. We needed good computing power, and that's where the focus was in the industry, probably back in the 80s. After that, it became more about computer usability, and the focus came into software. Then it became about universal access, so you got the focus into the internet. Then about content, and we saw the focus on open source content, self-publishing, wikis, and so on. And then in the quality, so you've got all that content out there. There's way too much content for you to ever access. How do you search it and get good quality and quantity control? The next limiter, in my opinion, is actually our ability to assimilate and learn that information. So the next step is, how do we do things with computers to make it easier for us to learn the information that's out there, not just find what's relevant to us, but deliver it to us in a way that takes account of our personal needs and teaches us and allows us to learn in an effective way. Right, this is a good one. Anybody in the audience know what this is? Any scientists out there? Yeah, great. Good. I knew there'd be somebody on my side. So this is the kind of equipment I used to use when I was a scientist. It's a scanning electron microscope. And these take pictures like these, which are absolutely amazing. This is an image of a silicon crystal. And you're looking here at individual silicon atoms within a lattice, which is incredible. If you look at the bottom here, the scale here says about 1 nanometer. So if you scale that up by a factor of 10 to the power 8, you get something like this, which is about the size of a tennis ball, about 10 centimeters across. If you scale that up by 10 to the 8, just to give us a feeling for the scales involved here, you get something the size of the Earth. So really, really small scale images. And why am I showing you this? This is a transistor, which is the basic element that you get in a silicon wafer in one of your chips in your computer. And if you scale that up to, again, by about 10 to the 8, you get something that we can recognize in our world, which is about the size of a car. The current generation of Intel chips are around 1 or 2 centimeters across. You scale those up by 10 to the 8, and you get an area which is pretty much a large part of Western Europe. And so you imagine all these cars bumper to bumper across a large part of Western Europe, and you get a feeling for how complex a silicon chip is. It's a phenomenal piece of engineering. And the reason I'm showing that is because everybody shows Moore's law, which I hope people here will be familiar with. And I never feel the graph of Moore's law. And Moore's law shows the progression in computer power over time. Really gets across just what's happening there. So in the modern computer chip, you're looking at about 2 billion transistors. It's an amazing feat of engineering, which I suspect won't be repeated for a long time in the future. So why am I showing you this? I'll get on to that. What I wanted to do was just show a few examples of the impact of technology. So that was the first one. The second one is in medicine. And in medicine, I've just chosen one example. This is maternal death rate. Stayed pretty flat up until the 1900s, and then dropped away very dramatically, all due to the impact of science and technology. So as I was doing a bit of research for this talk, it actually made me very optimistic about the world. I found lots of really great charts like this showing just what a fantastic world we live in today compared to 50 or 100 years ago. This is another one. Anybody know what that is? There might be an engineer in the audience. Screw thread. It's a Whitworth screw thread. Whitworth was the guy who came up with standardization of screw threads. Sounds like a small thing, but that, along with other standardizations and precision engineering, were what drove the Industrial Revolution and made us so much richer today than we were even 200 years ago. And I look at this one whenever I get worried about my mortgage payments. Again, I remind myself that we're actually quite well off today. So that was the purpose of those few slides at the beginning. If you can get into a situation where you've got the application of data-driven science, you've got reproducible, scalable technologies, and a lot of investment, that Moore's Law line involved a huge amount of investment. If you can get those three things together, absolutely amazing things happen. And I try to put myself in that mindset of, if you were to go back 200 years and tell doctors that you'd have absolutely no, or very few maternal deaths, they just wouldn't believe it was possible. And if you went back even 50 years and told people you're going to put 2 billion chips, 2 billion transistors on a chip, they wouldn't believe it was possible. And this is the way that people in Silicon Valley are looking at the education problem at the moment. And they really believe that by throwing a lot of money at this and a lot of clever people and a lot of technology and a lot of science, that they're going to make a really big impact on it. And it's something we need to be really aware of in the UK because they're making a lot of progress over there. So I'm going to switch now and just talk a little bit about why they've got interested from a market perspective. A couple of data points up here. On the left-hand side, you can see those red marks on the left. I don't know if it's visible, but this is online enrollment in higher education in the US. So you can see how quickly that is growing. And just as importantly, on the right is the projections for how much that market is going to grow by 2017. So these are very big numbers, and that's why these folks are interested in putting money into businesses to develop technologies to support this market. This is a second one, which is courtesy of Donald, which I hadn't come across, which is Peter Thiel is arguing at the moment that college education in the US is getting too expensive. And as you were saying, it's getting quite expensive here in the UK. And it's actually not always giving return on investment for the students. And then a third graph here, which is a well-known one, which is that I'll just explain what's on the chart here. This is showing investment, the investment in education, and also the staff-to-student ratio as a function of time in the US, and then attainment levels. And so what this graph is telling them in the US, and this comes from a relatively right-wing think tank in the US, so there's probably a little bit of play in the numbers there. I suspect it's not quite as black and white as it looks. But what they're looking at that and saying, look, that's not a scalable model. We can pour more money into it, but it's not giving us the extra output. And this is why they're interested in the technology. Okay, this is my, okay. This is, so when I was in Silicon Valley, it was during the dot-com bust, and there was a dot-com monopoly board, and they were going very, very cheap in the shops just around 2001. And so I bought a couple because I thought it was a good historical artifact. And it's great, because if you go around here, most of these companies, if they exist today, not really in the proper form. So although I think that's the plus side, although they are investing a lot of money in this in the US at the moment, they have a track record of a lot of money goes in, but also a lot of failures as well. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gear to the last few minutes of my presentation, just talk a little bit about what we do as a company and why I think it's interesting. So I think that there are 4 technologies that are going to really make a big difference in terms of online learning. The impact of open source and self-publishing is huge because it means, as you're doing, it means you can access learning from so many more people. That's one. Social and peer-supported learning, again, huge. Something we haven't heard much about over here yet, it's something I'll focus on now. the automated personalization, so delivering learning in an intelligent way to individuals to support them as individuals rather than as a mass group. And then the analytics and data mining that go with that. And these are areas that allow us to take scientific method and apply it to really good data so that hopefully we see those incremental improvements in performance, which over a period of time build into these huge changes in learning performance. So let me just tell you a little bit about the adaptive learning model. This is a standard model of learning. Each of these balls represents a learning activity or a concept you're trying to learn, and they're given to us in a fixed linear sequence. And if you're in a classroom, they're given to you in a fixed linear sequence at a fixed pace as well. The thing is that doesn't reflect the way that we learn. The way that we learn is we take a new idea, we try to connect it to things we already know in a meaningful way and develop understanding in that way. And the trouble is, a couple of things fall out of that picture of learning that don't work in this model. But one of them is that there are prerequisites. If you want to learn, I'll show an example in a moment, how to, for example, multiply, you've got to know a few things. You've got to know how to add, you need to know what equivalence is, you maybe need to know how to manipulate number visually. There are a whole range of things you need to be able to do. And if some of those are missing, you won't be able to learn how to multiply, no matter how hard you try. And the other is that we all have a different network of knowledge and learning when we come to a learning experience, which means that the learning has to be delivered to us each individually, differently. It has to be personalized. And so what adaptive systems do is instead of delivering learning to you in a fixed linear sequence, they break the learning up into small conceptual chunks or learning activities or skills, and they connect them together in a learning network with learning relationships between them. I'll show you an example of this. So this is a very, very simple example of a network for learning how to differentiate. So in order to differentiate, you can see a hierarchy here of all sorts of different knowledge and skills you may need to develop before you can differentiate. And what an adaptive system does is it takes you through the learning materials along a path that suits you. So if you get to this point, you understand tangents, want to move forwards, the system will try to intelligently work out, should we take you to common functions? Should we take you back down to axes and through graphs and through slopes and back up to a description of how graphs work before we take you on to common functions, and so on and so forth. So the system is trying to intelligently work out for each learner where to take them next to give them the optimum learning sequence. In our system, there's an adaptive engine that drives that, has about 17 different mini algorithms that are trying to work out how best to support the learner. And some of the contributions to that are things like the knowledge structure, the learner behavior, formative assessments, assessments as they're going along, profiling of users. So this is a little bit like your Tesco Club card, that you can profile users, which means that if somebody comes along, Donald wants to learn something, if we have a profile of users who have been similar to Donald in the past, and we know the things that have worked for them, we can help Donald in a way that's worked for similar people in the past. You take into account retention models, self-assessment, and so on. And so the point about this is that we're taking a very, very simple model for delivering learning. We're able to extract a huge amount of data from all of these learning activities and then do analysis on that data. Whoop. That's okay. Good. I watched Police Academy last night. And do a lot of analysis on that data and make, as I said earlier, small incremental improvements, but the point being they're incremental, one after the other, in the effectiveness of the learning. So systems like this, not only are they intelligently helping each learner, but they're intelligently improving over time. So over time we can work out what's been effective and therefore improve the algorithms and make the systems more effective over time. So, okay, this is my last slide. So that's what we do as a company. That kind of technology is being used in a lot of large companies in the US now. And as I say, it's receiving an awful lot of interest because it allows this personalization of the learning experience. And personalization based on a proper model of how people learn, not personalization based on your preferences or how you'd like things delivered to you. but personalization based on how we give you the most ideal learning sequence to help you learn most effectively. What's this a graph of? Okay, this is my last one. This is another great graph to cheer you up. This is how fast a human can travel as a function of time. It didn't change much until we got to about 1800s. And you probably know that at the end of the 1800s, if you owned a motor car, you had to have somebody walking in front of it with a red flag. And I think in the education sector, we need to keep in our minds that we want to be in a car running over that guy with the red flag. We don't want to be the person with the red flag slowing this down. And so, if anything, I was hoping to get across today that sense that we really now need to embrace the use of technology in education because big changes are coming down the road, and we want to be a part of that in Britain. So that's us. Thank you very much.